Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff, rang Sir Philip and said, in terms stronger than those that I can use before the watershed.
I think you should.
Well, I'll just say that it was just to prove it with terms stronger than that. Does that accord with your impression?
Just fucking approve it.
Does it accord with your impression when you took over from Sir Philip?
I know this sounds formal and maybe even a bit unlikely, but thank you very much for the opportunity today to come and speak to you about these matters. As you say, it has been a difficult time, leavened slightly by it being my birthday yesterday.
Yes, all that.
So thank you for the opportunity to set things out. I won't go on at length, but I think there are three important framing points I need to make. Firstly, as you say, when I walked into post as Permanent Under-Secretary on the 20th of January last year, I wasn't walking into a vacuum. I arrived to a situation in which a due diligence report had been undertaken into Mandelson by the Cabinet Office, assessing the reputational risks and his fitness for office. The Prime Minister had then presumably taken advice on his fitness for office. The name had been submitted to the King as Minister's recommendation. The Prime Minister had made an announcement that Mandelson was his nominee without caveats. The British government had sought agrément, the formal diplomatic process for a host government accepting a nominee from the US government, and that had been obtained before I arrived in post. He'd been given access to the building. He'd been given access to low classification IT. And from time to time, for case-specific issues, he was being given access to higher classification briefing. So I'm afraid I walked into a situation in which there was already a very, very strong expectation, and you would have seen the papers released already under the humble address, that coming from Number 10, that he needed to be in post and in America as quickly as humanly possible. The very first formal communication of this to my predecessor from Number 10 Private Office being that they wanted all this done at pace and Mandelson in post before inauguration. So that's the situation I faced.
I'm sorry, so there is paperwork about that, and that can presumably will be disclosed to Parliament?
It already has been, Chair.
That
letter from Number 10 Private Office is already in the disclosures made. There's nothing improper about it, but that's the context I walked into. So I'm afraid what that translated into for my team in the Foreign Office, and certainly the handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post, was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, I think, are going to move on to other aspects, but I just want to probe a little bit further on one or two of the answers you've already given. You've described to us the situation when you arrived in post, the extent to which various steps had already been appointed, due diligence, the approval of the King, the obtaining of agrément. Were you surprised that all of those had been completed without the vetting process having been done?
Thank you, Sir John. In the narrow sense, I wasn't surprised because I've been following the news. So when I arrived in post, I knew perfectly well that the Prime Minister had made his appointment, that it had been announced. And of course, then in my handover with Philip, he told me about agrément and the other steps that you mentioned. As I look back, whilst the Foreign Office didn't see it as I understand it at the time, I am also completely unsurprised by Simon Case's advice to the Prime Minister of November 2024, that if he wished to make a political appointment, it would be the safest course to achieve security clearance before making the announcement. And I think, had I been in post, Philip will speak for himself, maybe he did, but had I been in post at around that time, that's what I would have advised as well.
So you think it should have been obtained before those steps were taken?
I think, as others have said publicly in the last few days, this is unusual because most people appointed to ambassadorial roles already hold clearance.
Yeah.
But that's a very, very sensible position to be in, and it's what I would have advised in this case too.
Thank you. And you've also described...
I should say, I mean, in the American context, Sir John, as you may well be aware, it's a particularly sensitive issue because the United States government is very hot on the clearances people hold, and so it would have been a sensible precaution.
And actually, had approval not been granted and therefore the position had been revoked after agreement had already been obtained, would that have damaged our relations with the United States, in your view?
I think it certainly would have had. Yeah, I mean, I think it would have damaged them. Yes, Sir John. I mean, the process of getting agreement was taken at quite some pace, and was delivered, I think, still technically just by one working day by the Biden administration. I think if the nomination had changed after that point, the incoming administration may well have commented on it publicly, and it would, yes, have caused quite an issue in the relationship.
Right. And the dismissive approach of number 10, which you describe in your letter, you say that came from the fact that all of these steps had already been taken. Was there anything further which indicated to you that number 10 really didn't regard this as anything more than a formality which had to be completed?
To stay scrupulous, Sir John, nothing I can bear personal witness to, but certainly in my transition into the job, I was briefed, obviously, about the debate there had been about whether to vet at all, and that all added to a picture.
Thank you. Can I also ask a little bit more about the meeting you had on the 29th of January, which resulted in the decision to give DV clearance? You've said that you were briefed about the contents of the report by UKSV, but that you didn't see it. Now, we understand, indeed, the government has published the template decision-making form, in which there are 3 boxes at the end: a green one, an amber one which says approved but remain valid concerns, and the red one, the final one, clearance denied or withdrawn. Now, we are told that the tick was in the red box, clearance denied or withdrawn. Now, that doesn't seem to me borderline. Were you aware that the tick was in the red box?
I have, before the government chose to publish it, I've never seen a form like that. And so if I may make 2 points to John, I certainly do not recall the way in which the UKSV findings were presented to me as being that definitive. As I say, it was briefed to me that they were leaning against, I think it's the phrase I remember. But
leaning against is not the same as the decision. We are told that the decision, the recommendation rather, from UKSV was clear. The recommendation was denial. It wasn't leaning, it was denial.
Well, you asked me what I heard in that meeting, and I'm trying to remember to the best of my ability. The other point, which I think in the way you've asked the question you understand perfectly well, but just in case, that form is consumed differently in the Foreign Office and in half a dozen other departments than it is in other parts of the system. Those are recommendations and not decisions. And so what my team will have done, I'm sure, is break that down, go through the specific issues that have led UKSV to their concern, and then make an assessment as to whether they can be managed. And that's what came to me.
Your team did that. The meeting you had was only with the Director of Security, so it would have been his officials who have broken it down, and he would have reported to you the outcome of that process.
Right.
And a note was then circulated afterwards saying what the decision was. Did that note simply say, it has been decided that Lord Mandelson is to be granted clearance, or did it say, despite the recommendation of UKSV, it has been decided?
I think that minute is not a minute I can properly discuss, Sir John. It's no longer, sadly, my document. And as I said in answer to the Chair's questions earlier, it's a minute that certainly would give you, the public, but also our adversaries, quite a strong sense of how we tried to manage that process.
Can I just, because there's a little bit of mounting confusion, I think, on the committee, and if it's not just on the committee, it might be with the public as well. Are you saying that UKSV didn't recommend that DV be denied? I've put in too many negatives there. Are you saying that UKSV didn't recommend that DV be denied? Are you saying that?
No, I'm trying to tell the committee what I was briefed in that meeting on the 29th.
You're saying borderline.
I was told it was a borderline case and that they leant against.
Borderline and leant against. And that's different, is it, to recommend that DV be denied?
I can only tell you the words I heard.
I said you were not aware that this box had a tick in it, the red box saying clearance denied.
Until the government published it, I've never seen a sheet like that, Sir John.
But even if you hadn't seen the sheet, you didn't know that the clear recommendation, final decision of UKSV was clearance denied.
I was told that it was a borderline case and that UKSV were leaning against granting clearance.
This is the most sensitive diplomatic appointment in British government. We have seen a form where both boxes were for denied. Did you not think to check if there is a precedent where someone's been denied to then inform the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister?
I'm sorry to harp on. Peter Mandelson was not denied vetting.
The recommendation
the UKSV report, in the case of the Foreign Office and half a dozen other departments, makes a recommendation on the basis of findings. That's then assessed, and a decision is made by the department by a capable, experienced and expert team. So I didn't think I'd better go and find out whether people who've had some particular risks highlighted in a UKSV report have then had that information shared with the Prime Minister or with any other minister, because to do so would immediately have opened up the box of the vetting system, which I hold to this hour is an important part of our national defences.
Let me pivot to a slightly different way, because the form that we've seen that you're saying you've not previously seen, both the boxes were red, where it's high concern and clearance denied or withdrawn. But you're saying that's not a failure of vetting. So, related but separate. Once the disclosure of once Bloomberg had some emails disclosed to them and the Prime Minister was going forward at Prime Minister's questions, did you not think it was worth revisiting the UKSV document or having those discussions? And/or did you ever have any discussions about withdrawing security clearance now that new information has come to light?
So on the second part of your question, it didn't arise, honestly, because with Mandelson having been sacked with immediate effect from his post in Washington, his access to classified information was withdrawn immediately. And so, although, as you will know from the public documents, it took some days or even a couple of weeks for him to leave the government's payroll, the national security risk he could, in theory, have posed was eliminated immediately. The first part of your question again, sorry?
Once the Bloomberg, that cache of emails that Bloomberg had came to light, and you knew and this is questions on judgment, and I think I asked you this last time on the transcript, and so Chris Wormald actually told us in answer to some of these questions that the due diligence has two parts. There's identification of information and then there's judgment. You knew that the Prime Minister was set to stand at the dispatch box and vouch for one of your members of staff. Yep. You were rightly concerned with your staff's reputation, but my question to you at that time was, were you not worried about the Prime Minister being misled? Were you not worried about him misleading the House, given that you had not told him the full picture?
Yeah, I hope I've explained. I don't think that it would have been proper for me to expose what you call the full picture to the Prime Minister. I don't think I had an obligation to do that. I believe very strongly I had an obligation not to do that. What I do remember distinctly is in the immediate aftermath of his sacking as the Prime Minister's nominee to Washington, I did consider the asking for the UKSV underlying documentation. and that was discussed on my behalf with the Cabinet Office, who initially said that I needed a national security justification for reading that documentation. And that's completely consistent with my understanding of the system.
I'm sorry to sound like a broken record. Is there a record of this? Of this conversation?
I'm afraid you'll have to ask the department. The point that I'm trying to make is that then...
Is there a record of you asking? You would have thought about this and thought, I think I should look into this. I think I'm going to make this request, and these are the reasons why I'm going to make this request. Did you make a note of that?
Personally, I don't remember doing so. I'm sure there will be evidence that you could take that will stand that up. The thing I'm trying to get to, and is that actually the Cabinet Office's response made sense to me. This is a hermetically sealed box, and just because it's convenient to you as Permanent Undersecretary or reputationally timely to review this documentation, that doesn't mean you should do so. And so I think they changed their view later, and I also respect the reasons they might have changed their view. There was a lot of dialogue between the Foreign Office and the Cabinet Office as to who precisely owned this risk. But what I'm saying to you is, yes, it did cross my mind, but I wasn't surprised at the immediate reaction.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sir Olly. I've got questions about three different aspects of the process. Going back to the very beginning, before you started, there were conversations between Peter Mandelson and Number 10. So yesterday, the Prime Minister said, "It was clear to me that Peter Mandelson's answers to my staff in the due diligence exercise, before you started, were not truthful, and I sacked him." So that sounds like it's Morgan McSweeney. But when you came into the office, did you have notes of any interview that Morgan McSweeney had held with Peter Mandelson as a part of the due diligence or even the pre-due diligence when talking about appointing him? Did you see notes of this interview that may have given you concerns that could then have influenced how you saw the vetting process continue?
No.
You didn't know about any of those?
I knew that there had been an appointment process of sorts, and that Number 10 had operated that with the Cabinet Office, but to be honest, I think I first heard the words due diligence report after he was withdrawn as ambassador.
Thank you. And then the second one is about the meeting that you held on the 29th of January about the vetting. Did you hold that meeting because it was flagged that Peter Mandelson hadn't passed? If it was a clear pass, a green tick box in the form you didn't see, would you have even held that meeting? Or did you hold the meeting because it was an ambassadorial appointment to Washington and it was Peter Mandelson?
I was asked for that meeting because I think it was a borderline case, and a particularly prominent and significant borderline case on which, perfectly properly, very sensibly, the director felt he wanted to check his reasoning and make sure that I was comfortable with it.
And is there a note to that effect? That the request was that the decision was made that you should have a meeting because of these issues were going to come up?
Not to my knowledge. It was, this was Director ESND was one of the most important figures in the way I was learning how to run the department. I'd spent a lot of time with Ian already because of the heavy responsibilities that I was learning that I held as accountable overall for security. So Ian was in and out of my private office regularly, and I was pleased about that. He, I think, said to my private office, I need 10 minutes with Olly tomorrow, the day after, in order to take him through a particular case. A
particular case? Not the particular case that you've been rung up every day by Number 10 to ask about?
This is second-hand. I'm trying to help you by guessing what the conversation might have been.
All right, okay. It's unfortunate, because if there had been a note made of the decision that the putting into the diary of a meeting that was going to take place for particular purposes and with particular reasons, if there had been a note of that, then we wouldn't need to guess at the reasons for it, and Fleur would be able to get fuller answers to the questions that she's asking.
Although I should say again, apologies, Chair, none of the issues that underlie the conversation we've been having this morning could have been committed to our IT system. So, and for all I know, my diary will say that there is an appointment with Director ESND, but the office were not allowed. It would have been a serious breach for them to try and explain in that appointment in my calendar what the underlying questions were.
You can make notes to your private office, can't you, about what you're doing and why?
What was done, I think, entirely appropriately, was that the decision was recorded the next day.